be presenting Triumph over the Tragedy of Smallpox, the first mass inoculation program. Behold, the troops all loaded and locked. There's many recruits could be fevered and poxed if General Washington cannot manage to stop the smallpox epidemic. Disease has caused much tragedy. If it could be stopped, what a triumph it'd be for the Continental Army. During the American Revolution, the Continental Army was threatened by outbreaks of variola major, or smallpox. Few American soldiers had been exposed to the disease, while a milder outbreak in England a few years back had conferred immunity on most British troops, giving them both a military advantage and a means of biological warfare. General Washington recognized the importance of inoculating the troops, and in 1777, he directed William Shippen Jr., me, Director General of Army Hospitals, to begin a secret campaign to inoculate the Continental Army. This campaign would become the first mass inoculation of troops and would save the Continental Army from the threat of smallpox, allowing them to triumph both over the disease and the British Army. So let us talk a little bit about smallpox. In 1775, the pestilence spread through Boston while it was under siege by the British Army. The garrison there put a quarantine on the city. Nobody left, nobody came in, at least until the British General, William Howe, started letting the citizens of Boston inoculate themselves. Shortly after this, he then started forcing certain people to leave the city. You could say this was biological warfare. Let me explain. Inoculation is the process by which one infects another person with a milder version of the smallpox. About a fortnight later, the person's body recovers and they are immune. But in this 2-week span of time, they are just as contagious as a person is with a natural disease, and as such, they must be quarantined while the inoculation runs its course. If they are let out of quarantine too soon, the disease can spread just as badly as it can naturally. But how exactly do we inoculate? Well, let me show you. I take a lancet and make a small incision between the thumb and forefinger. I then take a piece of thread that has been coated in pus, harvested from a person with the smallpox, and I use it to suture the wound. Now, once the inoculee is healed properly, he or she must be smoked and bathed to properly prevent the further spread of the infection, and I take out the thread used to suture the wound and dispose of it. So back to Boston last year. General Washington was facing freshly inoculated and contagious residents being marched away from the British-occupied city and towards his men. To stop his troops being infected, he banned all refugees from Continental Army camps and had anyone who even appeared sickly put into quarantine. Under these circumstances, his quarantine worked. In Quebec, however, it was a different story. The pox wreaked havoc among our ranks, and combined with the British defenses, they absolutely crushed our forces. But here we are in a new year, 1777. There is a rife of smallpox in Philadelphia due to the unregulated inoculation of people throughout the city. General Washington and his men are camped a few miles outside at Valley Forge. Conditions are bad and the pox threatens a large number of his men. He is contemplating the 2 ways of suppressing the disease, quarantine and inoculation. Quarantine presents many logistical challenges with our limited supplies, not least of which is providing new or freshly cleansed clothing. The other option, of course, is inoculation. The procedure is expensive and, as I said, it takes a while to work. I've exchanged many a letter on the matter with my dear friend General Washington. Here's one of my missives, dated January 5th, 1777. I provided His Excellency General Washington with a long list of personnel and supplies needed for the hospital department, of which I now have charge after a little unpleasantness with Dr. Morgan. Dear Sir, the smallpox rages, and it is the opinion of the Committee of Congress and the Generals, and that inoculation should take place immediately in such a manner as that those who pass and repass hereafter may not be liable to receive the infection unless circumstances may make it proper. It is 3 to 1 that all in town have taken the infection and will carry it to the army unless inoculated. The General wrote me back on the 28th of January, having previously noted that my plans for the hospital department might be a little too ambitious. Dear Sir, in your last you mentioned your intention of inoculating all the recruits who have not had the smallpox. This would be a very salutary measure if we could prevent them from bringing the infection onto the army, but as they cannot have a change of clothes, I fear it is impossible. We shall soon have the troops from the eastwards, and as few of them have had the disorder, we should have a great part of our army laid down. So there you have it, the crux of the whole issue. Inoculation puts too many men out of commission at once, while quarantine, while effective during the Boston siege, is not necessarily workable when you have so many possibly infected men joining the army. The general suggested a preliminary quarantine measure and ordered that we were to suffer no more of the southern troops to come into Philadelphia, but march them to Germantown and let them remain there until they are equipped and ready to march. All that now had the disorder be perfectly cured, and before they are suffered to join the army, to have new clothes if possible, and if not the old ones, well washed, aired, and smoked. Although I felt that inoculation would work better, the general is the commander-in-chief, so I did as he ordered. I wrote him back on the 31st of January. Dear Sir, I am honored with your 2 letters, and shall pay a strict obedience to their contents, particularly with regard to the smallpox, from which no danger will be dreaded after 2 or 3 weeks. The houses where they are kept are out of the town strictly guarded, and no patient is suffered to remain a minute in the city with the smallpox. For the future or after the persons now recover, the greatest care shall be taken, according to your Excellency's direction, to remove all the infection from their clothes, if new ones can't be had, and the hospital on Province Island shall be the receptacle for all hereafter infected. Alas, as I feared, the pox spread as pestilence does in times of war. Within a week I had word from General Washington changing his orders. Dear Sir, finding the smallpox to be spreading much and fearing that no precaution can prevent it from running through the whole of our army, I have determined that the troops shall be inoculated. Necessity not only authorizes, but seems to require the measure, for should the disorder infect the army in the natural way and rage with its virulence, we should have more to dread from it than from the sword of the enemy. Under these circumstances, I have directed Dr. Baum to prepare immediately for inoculation in this quarter, keeping the matter as secret as possible, and request that you will without delay inoculate all continental troops that are in Philadelphia, and those that shall come in as fast as they arrive. I would fain hope that they will soon be fit for duty, and that in a short space of time we shall have an army not subject to this greatest of all calamities that can befall it when taken in the natural way. And with this order, I have undertaken to begin what I believe will be the first mass military inoculation against smallpox. It is to be hoped that this measure will protect our army from the tragedy of smallpox and allow us to prevail over the tyrannous British. I should note that General Washington's orders only apply to continental regulars. As a physician, I imagine this will make any irregulars, including any African American, Native American, or Minutemen, particularly susceptible to the disease, especially given the British willingness to use it as a weapon against those vulnerable to its incursion. Nonetheless, inoculation of all continental regulars should protect enough of our men to allow us to turn the tragedy of smallpox into the triumph of modern medicine and victory over the British Army. The continental soldiers, the campaign spread to other states, and there was immunity all over. It's true that regulars were denied the variolation lancet. Native and African Americans perished, infected by other men and by blankets. Nonetheless, the smallpox tragedy was conquered. By inoculation, we triumphed over the disease and established our great nation.